Clara woke early the next morning, the gray Portland light seeping through her bedroom curtains before her alarm went off. She lay still for a minute, listening to the quiet hum of the building HVAC and waiting for the familiar twist of anxiety to settle. The threat Marlow had sent hung over her, sharp and unignorable, but Clara knew she could not cave in. Paying the tablet charge would set a permanent precedent. Marlow would keep stretching the definition of household expenses whenever she needed to cover her own bills. She swung her legs over the bed and grabbed her laptop, pulling up the exported spreadsheet copies she had saved the night before. She created a separate document to log every request she refused to approve, noting dates, amounts, and Marlow's written explanations for each line item. Her plan was simple: stop the automatic monthly transfers into their informal shared fund and only approve charges she could verify with receipts. It was not revenge, just basic protection. After brewing a cup of coffee in the kitchen, Clara found Marlow leaning against the counter, scrolling through her phone. The air between them felt thick and strained. No casual good morning like the weeks before. Marlow glanced up, one eyebrow lifted. "You made up your mind about the Venmo request?" "I want to finish the audit first," Clara replied, keeping her tone steady. "I'm asking again for every original receipt or transaction record for all shared purchases over the last 6 months. Once we reconcile those, we can discuss the tablet charge." Marlow sighed, setting her phone down hard enough that the screen clicked against the granite countertop. "I already told you I don't keep every receipt." "This is ridiculous. No one runs a roommate situation like an people do when the system keeps shifting to benefit only one person," Clara said. "I'm also stopping the automatic pooled transfer. From now on, I'll only approve individual Venmo requests with attached proof of purchase."
"No more blanket monthly payments." Marlow's expression hardened.
"You can't just change the whole setup unilaterally. We agreed to a system that was supposed to be transparent," Clara entered. "Transparency means receipts. If you won't provide them, I can't keep funding it." For a long moment, Marlow stared at her, calculating. Then she shrugged, as if Clara's choice barely mattered. "Fine. Stop the transfers if that's what you want. But don't be surprised when shared bills don't get paid on time. Utilities, rent, those still come due a month. If you hold me, the late fees land on both." Clara had considered that risk carefully. Rent was paid directly to the landlord separately from their informal household fund, laid out clearly. Utilities were jointly, but she could track those statements independently. She had confirmed that detail before, reading through every page of the rental agreement. Rent and utility invoices come straight to both emails. Those are separate from the personal household purchases you log in a spreadsheet. I won't withhold money for legally required bills." Marlow did not argue further. She grabbed her jacket off by the door and left without a word, the front door latching shut. Clara spent the rest of the morning compiling a polite written request for receipts and shared expense reconciliation, saving it as a... Before sending it, she texted Alara to run by her. Alara wrote back quickly, warning Clara that Marlow might respond by escalating the conflict to the landlord early to paint Clara as... An hour later, that prediction almost came true. Clara's phone buzzed with a preview of a message Marlow had sent to the landlord's work address, copied into a group text sheet. The message described Clara refusing to follow their house budget system and implied she might refuse future. Clara. Marlow was moving to frame the conflict before Clara could. She composed a calm reply to the landlord, clarifying the difference between lease obligations and their private bill arrangement, and attached copies of the formal lease to show rent and utilities split separately. She avoided accusations it factual, only stating she was requesting documentation for informals. By mid-afternoon, Marlow's apartment. She found Clara at the dining table, laptop open, files. Marlow crossed the room and leaned against the table edge, voice low. "You really went and informed Hale already? This was seen us." "You copied your email to him," Clara said. "I respond correct the record. I don't want him version." Marlow pushed off the table and walked toward her bedroom. "This isn't over. If you keep blocking payments and demanding receipts, things in this apartment are going to get her for you." That evening, Clara sent the formal written request for all receipts and records. She turned off automatic pooled transfers from her bank account, a small choice. She was no longer passively sending money into a verify. She had shifted from enduring the arrangement to defending herself. But Marlow would be raising the stakes, willing to pull their landlord into their private marriage. Clara closed her laptop and glanced across the living room at the unopened tablet box coffee table. The birthday gift in the crack in the facade, but the fight was now about control, transparency, and whether Marlow could keep manipulating their consequence. She knew Marlow would hand over proof easily, and the next move would push their already fraying relationship past any chance of easy repair. The floorboards creaked faintly under Clara's feet as she paced the narrow hallway between the living room and the bedrooms, her thumb hovering over the screenshot folder on her phone. Marlow's door stayed shut, no sound leaking out except the faint thud of a closed laptop and the low hum of a space heater. An hour had passed since their argument, and the sharp edge of anger had softened into a heavy, uneasy caution. Clara knew Marlow would not let the tablet charge drop easily, not after framing the entire spreadsheet system as a labor of fairness. She needed to tread carefully, to ask her questions without tipping her hand that she was building a record of every questionable entry. She paused outside Marlow's door and knocked gently, 3 slow taps. When Marlow called for her to come in, Clara pushed the door open just enough to step inside. Marlow sat at her desk, back turned partially toward the doorway, pretending to scroll through work emails on her monitor. The wireless drawing tablet still rested in its box on the living room coffee table, forgotten for the moment. "Can we talk about this calmly?" Clara asked, keeping her tone neutral, careful not to sound accusatory. "I want to understand how you categorize that tablet, and any other purchases we might disagree on moving forward." Marlow spun her chair around, her expression guarded. "There's nothing to understand. The rules are already laid out in the spreadsheet notes. Anything used inside the apartment qualifies as a shared household expense. You work from home sometimes. That tablet is used in this space. It's exclusively mine," Clara replied. "I bring it to the office 4 days a week. You've never touched it, and you don't draw digitally. That rule wasn't discussed when we moved in together. You added it later, did you?" Marlow's jaw tightened. "I updated the notes as we figured out what worked for both. That's how systems evolve. If every time I adjust a category you're going to me, managing shared bills becomes impossible." She leaned, her voice softening into that familiar persuasive cadence that had worked so many times before. "Look, I know your birthday upset you, but don't make this personal. I picked the tablet because I care about you. I didn't think splitting the cost would hurt your—" Clara almost had the old urge to smooth things over rising up. She put down. "A gift isn't supposed to come with a Venmo bill attached. I'd like to review every receipt linked to the shared entries from the last 6 months. If something is marked as a house purchase, I need to see proof of what it was and when." Marlow laughed quietly, shaking her head. "You really don't me now? I don't keep every single per receipt. Most purchase digital, and I don't want to clutter the spreadsheet with dozens of PDF. The line item can be vague," Clara said. "Last month there was a $220 charge listed as house supplies. I never saw bulk toilet paper, cleaning spray, or anything that would add." Marlow waved a hand dismissively. "I bought specialty skincare and a few staples. They count as household goods. We both use the bath kitchen. I don't use your skincare products," Clara pointed out. Before Marlow could respond, Clara's phone vibrated in her pocket. She stepped back into the hallway to check it, finding a text from Ilara. Ilara had warned her months ago to document every shared ex with Marlow, worried that the freelance roommate's inconsistent income might. Clara had brushed it off then. Now she typed a quick summary of the fight and attachments. By the time she glanced up, Marlow was standing in the bedroom doorway. "Water. You're sending suits to Ilara?" Marlow's voice sharp. "Already talking behind my back?" "I'm asking for advice," Clara answered. "I haven't lied anything that happened. Of course not. You'll leave out all the parts where you agreed to my system and follow it." Marlow crossed her arms. "If you're going to dig through old charges, call me dishonest. I'm going to double-check everything you've made too. I can adjust entries if I find." That quiet threat settled in Clara's chest. Marlow planned to alter the spreadsheet to cover gaps if Clara kept investigating. The original digital records would be rewritten, leaving Clara with no proof unless she took copies immediately. She excused herself and retreated to her bedroom, door behind her, and spent the next hour exporting every version history of the goods she could access, saving PDF copy drive. Later that evening, Ilara called her. The line crackled slightly over speakerphone. Clara spoke plainly. "Screenshots aren't enough." Marlow edits the sheet. "You need every original transaction confirmation for bank or Venmo. Without those, she can rewrite history and say the document." Clara stared at the tablet box across the bedroom door. She had thought the conflict was only about an expensive birthday gift, but Ilara's warning made it clear the manipulation far deeper. Marlow was already preparing to defend her sister, to shift blame, and rewrite her. When Clara checked her phone 10 minutes later, a notification waited. Marlow had sent a follow-up message attached to the pending $100 request. either a charge by the end of the week, or Marlow would note Clara as refusing to uphold their household agreement with their landlord. Clara set her face down on the nightstand. The fragile truce they had maintained for 6 months was gone completely. There was no way to back down without letting Marlow set the terms. Whatever happened next, their life together in this apartment would never feel casual or friendly again. The hum of the apartment's old refrigerator settled low in the background as Clara slid her thumb along the wrapping paper's creased edge. Sunlight filtered thin through the dusty living room window, streaking across the scuffed oak floor where she and Marlow had spread out the small pile of gifts that morning. It was Clara's 34th birthday, and she'd tried not to expect much. Most years, she treated herself to takeout and a quiet evening alone. Sharing the apartment with Marlow had softened that expectation a little, made her think small. Warm gestures might come naturally between roommates who'd once been coworkers. Marlow sat across from her on the faded fabric couch, one ankle crossed over the other, a lazy, bright smile fixed on her face. Her dark hair fell forward as she leaned in, gesturing toward the rectangular box Clara held. "I spent forever picking this out," Marlow said. "Figured you'd actually use it, not let it sit in a closet like the candles everyone usually gets you." "Open it!" Clara's fingers folded back the last strip of tape. Inside lay a sleek wireless drawing tablet, the kind she'd quietly mentioned wanting months prior, when she'd complained to Marlow about her aging work device, lagging mid-project. A quiet flicker of warmth bloomed in her chest. She lifted it carefully, turning the smooth surface in her hands, and glanced up to thank her roommate. Before she could speak, Marlow tapped the phone resting between them on the coffee table, pulling up the shared Google sheet they used for household expenses. "Since we pool funds for shared household purchases." "I logged it last night," Marlow said casually, scrolling a finger down the rows of numbers. "Split evenly, same as always. Your half came out to $187. I sent the Venmo request 5 minutes ago, so you can cover it whenever you get a chance." The warmth in Clara's chest vanished instantly, replaced by a cold, tight heat that settled behind her ribs. She blinked once, twice, trying to make sure she'd heard correctly. Her gaze drifted from the expensive tablet to the spreadsheet glowing on Marlow's. The line item plainly labeled, "Birthday gift for a split household." Clara said, setting the tablet back into its box. "This was supposed to be a birthday gift from you, not something we split from our shared house." Marlow's smile faltered for barely a second before it sharper around the edges. She sat up later, tilting her head the way she always did when she framed an argument as simple. "Where else would the money come from? We agreed everything we both benefit from goes into the shared budget. You're going to use this tablet every single Clara. That makes it a household." "I'm the only one," Clara countered, her voice quieter than she wanted it to be, a familiar twinge of hesitation. She hated being the person who seemed difficult or ungrateful on her own birthday. Still, she couldn't ignore how wrong it felt. Household purchases are toilet paper, dish soap, grocery eat. "A gift specifically for me isn't a thing," Marlow huffed, locking her phone and setting it face down on the table. The soft click of the screen shutting felt final, like a door closing between them. "I built this entire system to keep things, remember? You said you hated guessing who what. Hated random surprise charges popping up at the end of the month. I spent hours building a spreadsheet, adjusting formulas, categorizing every expense so neither of us gets ripped off. Now you want to rewrite the rules just because of your birthday?" Clara stared at a closed phone, her mind racing back through the previous 6 months together. Small, confusing charges she'd brushed off before suddenly clicked into place. The premium streaming subscription she didn't watch, listed under entertainment. Bottles of skincare Marlow used alone, marked as house. Takeout orders Marlow ate while Clara worked late at the office, split equal. Every time Clara had paused to quote a line item, Marlow talked her down, framed her overthinking, reminded her they were a team. She'd chosen to trust, keep the peace, conflict. This tableting point. It wasn't an accidental miscalculation. It was proof the entire bill-splitting system Marlow had designed worked only in Marlow's favor. A carefully built trap to this. Marlow's freelance income bounced month to month, while Clara's salary arrived on the 15th, reliable enough to cover whatever gaps appeared. Clara reached for her own phone of the couch, opening Venmo to see the pending request notifications. The look at her. $187. Half the cost of a gift was freely given. She swallowed hard, lifting Marlow's. "I didn't get personal gifts," Clara said, her voice steadier now. "I'll charge." Marlow's expression shifted, the easy, friendly completely. She stood from the couch, planted on her hips, and glanced toward the apartment's front door as if already prepared further. If you're going to pick apart every line item and refuse to hold up your end of our deal, then we've got a much problem to sort out. This anymore. Clara sat alone on the couch once Marlow retreated to her bedroom, the door clicking shut behind her. The birthday gift sat untouched in its open box between them. She pulled up the shared spreadsheet on her own phone, scrolling through months of entries, capturing screenshot after screenshot with trembling fingers, every small overcharge, every vague description, every time Marlow had redirected her questions away from receipt. For the first time, Clara could see the full shape of the manipulation stretched out across rows and columns of numbers. The quiet she'd built in this apartment, the peace worked so hard to preserve, cracked open irreparably. There was no going back to pretending everything was fine. Marlow did not reply to Clara's message for nearly 24 hours. Clara spent the waiting period drafting a simple, organized ledger that separated legitimate shared costs from the personal charges she had uncovered, cross-referencing each entry with dates, amounts, and whatever proof she had managed to gather. By the time Marlow's text finally appeared, it was short, defensive, and dismissive of the skincare receipt Clara had sent over. That purchase was a one-time mix-up, Marlow wrote. She had accidentally logged it under household supplies when she sorted receipts late at night. It did not prove anything about the rest of the spreadsheet, and Clara was blowing a tiny error out of proportion to justify refusing the tablet charge. Clara read the message slowly, her jaw tightening. A single accidental mislabel might have been believable if she had not already found multiple other entries with the same pattern. She responded by listing 3 more questionable charges from earlier months: a streaming subscription for a platform Clara never used, takeout meals ordered when she was out of town for a work conference, and a pet bed for Marlow's cat, which had also been split evenly between them. She asked Marlow to provide proof that those purchases benefited both residents of the apartment. The reply never came. Instead, Marlow knocked on Clara's bedroom door after dinner, her posture rigid, voice sharp enough to cut through the quiet hum of the heating unit. She insisted they talk face-to-face instead of hiding behind tech, and Clara agreed, stepping out into the living room where the overhead light cast hard shadows across the worn couch. Marlow sat down and folded her hands tightly in her lap. "I can see you're determined to dig through every small mistake and paint me as someone trying to cheat. This whole fight is ruining how we live together, and I'd rather fix it than keep going back and forth." Clara kept her tone calm. "Then give me the records I asked for. Let's reconcile every entry." Marlow hesitated for a moment, then shifted the conversation entirely. She suggested they settle the audit informally, skip sorting through months of old purchases, and draft a new written agreement to govern all future shared expenses. Before Clara could respond, Marlow pulled a typed document out from her bag and laid it on the coffee. The paper included a clause stating both women waived all claims to past billing errors once. Clara scanned the lines. If she put her signature on that page, she would forfeit any chance to recover the money Marlow had improperly charged her over the previous 6 months. It was a clean way for Marlow to close the audit without paying anything, while locking Clara into a new set of rules written entirely by her. "I can't," said, sliding the paper back across the table. "Waiving past claims isn't a reasonable part of fixing our billing." Marlow's expression. "You're really going to hold on to this? We live in the same space. Making things hostile helps no one. What if we renewed the lease together for another year? We could reset everything, build a brand new spreadsheet." The offer hung in the air, and Clara felt the faint pull of. Moving was expensive in Portland. Security deposits, moving trucks, utility up fees, and weeks of packing added. Staying with clearer rules in place might save her a great deal of stress and money. But she knew renewing meant continuing to live with someone who had manipulated her budget and tried to pressure her into drop. Before she could answer, Marlow stood up and walked. "Think it over. I'm not going to beg you." Over the next 2 days, Clara kept digging through records, locating bank statements and Venmo histories on her own. She tallied the improper charge one by one, adding. When she finished adding every line she could verify, the total was well over $1,200. It was not a cash sum, but it was money she had to save, cash that had been quietly siphoned out of her budget under the guise of shared household responsibility. The drawing tablet had a trigger. The exploitation had stretched across nearly their entire. Clara realized she could no longer treat this as a series of isks. Marlow's billing system had been structured to shift her own financial instability onto Clara's reliable income all along. The freelance worked up some months, and Marlow had built a safety net by passing personal costs onto her roommate. When Marlow learned Clara had calculated the total of imputed charges, she She stopped arguing about individual receipts and pushed harder to waiver agreement, reminding Clara that dragging this out would make the rest of her. If Clara refused to settle quickly, Marlow warned, she might have to consider other. Clara sat alone that night, staring at her ledger on the laptop screen. The conflict had grown far beyond a birthday gift and a single quest. She was choice. Accept one-sided settlement and lost money go, or keep pushing for repayment and face months of tension in settlement. Marlow was already preparing to lock the dispute away permanently, and the window to recover her funds was growing fast. The weight of the $1,200 tally settled heavy in Clara's thoughts over the weekend. She spread printed copies of her ledger across the dining table Saturday morning, sorting digital receipts and photos into labeled folders while Alara sat beside her, sipping cold coffee and reviewing each line for gaps. Alara circled several entries where Clara lacked original transaction confirmations, explaining those would be harder to argue if the dispute ever escalated. They worked quietly for hours, the only sounds the scratch of a pen, the soft tap of keyboard keys, and distant traffic rolling past the apartment windows. By mid-afternoon, Marlow emerged from her bedroom. She paused in the kitchen doorway, watching them for a long beat, before grabbing a water bottle from the fridge without a word. Clara noticed Marlow typing rapidly on her phone as she retreated, and a quiet unease settled in her chest. She had guessed Marlow would keep managing their shared social circle, but she could not predict what version of the story Marlow was sending to mutual friends. That evening, the first subtle ripple appeared. A former coworker sent Clara a short, awkward text, saying she hoped things worked out between her and Marlow, and that fighting over money could ruin good friendships. Another mutual contact stopped replying to Clara's casual messages entirely. Marlow was not yelling or sending angry threats. She was sharing her framing of the conflict one private conversation at a time, painting Clara as stubborn, unforgiving, and fixated on small amounts of money instead of preserving their living arrangement. Clara tried reaching out to a couple of friends to explain her side, but many did not want to get pulled into roommate drama. One person flatly told her that both sides probably had fault, and she should consider letting it go to keep the peace. For the first time since the fight began, Clara felt truly isolated. The people she expected to listen were stepping back, worn down by Marlow's steady, low-key narrative. On Monday, Alara called with practical news. She had looked over the lease and confirmed what Clara had suspected weeks before. All of Marlow's informal spreadsheet rules, pooled funds, and verbal household agreements carried no legal weight. The landlord's contract only defined rent, utility responsibility, property damage, and lease termination terms. Marlow could not enforce her custom bill-splitting system through the rental agreement, and she could not force Clara to sign a waiver for past charges. The realization brought a strange mix of relief and Clara was not bound by Marlow's private rules, but that freedom came with a hard. If she pushed for repayment, she risked living the remaining 4 months of the lease in a hostile apartment. Breaking the lease early would cost thousands in termination fees, and Portland's competitive rental market made finding a new 2-bedroom unit on short notice. Her emergency fund could cover the move, but draining it would set back her long-term savings. That was what Marlow seemed to be. Clara would choose financial convenience over fighting for what she wanted. Clara lay awake first, confronting the part of herself that had allowed this to continue. She hated confrontation so deeply that she had ignored small warning signs to avoid discomfort. Every time a vague charge, every time Marlow brushed off her questions, Clara had backed down, prioritizing harmony over protecting her. She had wanted to believe Marlow was a friend, that their living arrangement was a fair partnership, and she had ignored evidence that said, recognizing that weakness stung more than the law. Next day, Marlow approached Clara, her tone calm, almost gentle, as she said several mutual friends had mentioned how stressful the situation was. She suggested Clara drop the repayment demand, offer a start, and keep living together. If Clara refused, Marlow said she would not make life easy in the apartment for the rest. Clara did not give an answer. She retreated to her bedroom and the door, sitting on the edge of her bed while she waited. Her support net shrunk, moving with her savings. Marlow was prepared to make daily life uncomfortable and kept fighting. For a moment, it felt like every possible choice carried a face. But when she opened her folder of evidence again, saw the ledger, the receipts, the saved spreadsheets. She was not fighting for revenge. She was fighting to stop letting someone take advantage of her willingness to compromise. Even with almost everyone else staying neutral away, she still held. The low arrived. Nearly all her casual social support was gone, and the practical path of least resistance demanded she same. Yet in that quiet, lonely moment, her resolve solidified. She would not sign the waiver, and she would not back down. Clara spent the next morning drafting a formal, evidence-backed reconciliation document. She kept the tone neutral, stripped of frustration or blame, listing each disputed charge, the date it was logged, the amount, and the supporting proof she had collected. She separated the expenses into 2 clear categories: legitimate shared costs they both agreed to pay, and personal purchases Marlow had incorrectly split between them. At the bottom, she included a total requested repayment and a proposed timeline for settling the balance. Before sending it over, she shared the draft with Clara, who trimmed any phrasing that could be read as hostile. "Stick to the math," Clara advised over a quick coffee run to the corner diner. Anger gives her an opening to shift focus. Facts don't. Clara sent the document to Marlow via email midday, attaching scanned copies of receipts, PDF spreadsheet histories, and Venmo transaction screenshots. She also copied the message into their shared text thread for easy reference, so there would be no claim the email had gone missing. Then she waited. Marlow responded an hour later, asking to talk face-to-face in the living room after dinner. When they sat across from each other that evening, the coffee table between them held none of the casual warmth from earlier months. Marlow skimmed the printed version Clara laid out, tapping her finger along the line items with a slow, deliberate rhythm. For the first time since the fight began, she could not immediately dismiss the evidence as overreaction or misunderstanding. "Some of these entries were sloppy on my part," Marlow admitted, her voice quieter than usual. "I didn't track everything as carefully as I should have. I can pay back part of the total, but not all of it." Clara leaned forward slightly. "What portion are you off?" $800, Marlow said. "That covers most of what you're contesting. But only if you delete every screenshot, PDF, and photo of receipts you've saved. No sharing this with anyone. No bringing it up again once we settle. We sign a simple agreement that this closes everything between." The conditional offer hung in the air. Marlow was willing to return some money, but only if Clara destroyed all proof and erased the trail of what had happened. If Clara agreed, Marlow could deny the whole story later, and there would be nothing left to prove otherwise. It was a partial victory wrapped in a... Clara shook. "I can't delete the documentation. Those records protect both of us if we disagree again later. If we reach a settlement, we can sign a written closure statement. But I will keep my copies for my own..." Marlow's jaw tightened. "Then I'm not paying anything. You're holding on to proof to use against me whenever..." "I'm holding proof to confirm this settlement final," Clara replied. "I have no intention of talking about this with mutual friends or post anywhere. I just won't destroy..." Marlow stood abruptly and walked to the bedroom, the door clanged shut. Clara stayed on the couch, reviewing. She had expected Marlow back, but the demand to erase all records told her Marlow was worried about control of the narrative was... Next day, Marlow tried it. She texted to say she would accept Clara's ledger if Clara agreed to build an entirely new shared system, managed jointly by both of them. Every purchase would require a receipt attachment, and neither could log charges without the other. Clara considered a transparent, dual-managed system was what she had asked for. But she also recognized that Marlow was attempting to reset the conversation, treating repayment as secondary to rewriting their household rules. Clara replied that she was open to a new shared system only after they finalized repayment for the misallocation. That afternoon, Clara called with another. She gave Clara the contact information for a low-cost tenant advocacy in Portland, staffed by volunteers familiar with roommate disputes and informing. Clara scheduled a phone consultation following week. She didn't intend to sue, but she wanted to understand her rights before she... By evening, Marlow... She had reviewed the ledger again and was willing to pay the full $2, but she wanted to spread the payments. Clara wrote back to confirm a payment schedule in writing, with due date. As she locked her phone, Clara realized the dead. Marlow was no longer deflecting or making excuses. He was negotiating. The power that had sat entirely with Marlow while she controlled the spreadsheet had begun toward Clara. Not because Clara had become aggressive, but because she had built a careful, documented case. But the piece was fragile. Marlow apologized, and Clara suspected there was still something back. Before she could process that thought fully, a notification popped up on her screen. A message request from an unfamiliar name appeared in her social media inbox. It left her cold. "I lived years ago. The same thing happened to me." Clara hesitated for several minutes before opening the message fully. The sender introduced herself as Lila, Marlow's former roommate from an apartment they had shared 2 years prior in North Portland. Lila explained she had heard bits of the conflict through a mutual acquaintance and wanted to warn Clara that Marlow's custom bill-splitting spreadsheet was not a new system. It was a pattern. Lila described nearly identical circumstances, vague household line items, personal purchases hidden under shared expense labels, and pressure to accept informal rules with no receipts. When Lila had challenged the charges, Marlow had framed her as unreasonable and pushed for a signed waiver to avoid paying back the overages. Lila had moved out early, absorbing moving costs rather than fighting through a lengthy dispute. She attached a few old screenshots of her own to back up her story and offered to speak as a witness if Clara needed it. Clara forwarded the exchange to Alara immediately. Alara replied quickly, saying the witness account strengthened her position dramatically. Marlow could no longer write the incident off as a one-sided misunderstanding between just the two of them. It was a repeated tactic. Armed with this new information, Clara prepared for their next discussion. Before she could reach out, Marlow messaged to schedule a living room meeting that evening. When they sat down, Marlow brought up furniture they had purchased shortly after moving in together. She claimed Clara owed her nearly $400 for a wooden dining set, a bookshelf, and storage bins they had bought on a single trip to a big-box retailer. Clara frowned. I paid for my own furniture separately. I kept my old desk, chair, and bed frame from my last apartment. The dining set was listed in the shared spreadsheet, but I thought we split. Marlow shook her head. The receipt was under my name, and I covered the full amount up front. You never gave me your portion. Clara's stomach sank for a moment. She tried to recall the shopping trip, and for a second she worried she had forgotten a Venmo payment. She excused herself to her bedroom and pulled up her bank and Venmo history from that. After 10 minutes of searching, she found the confirmation. She had sent Marlow her half the same day they returned from the... She captured screenshots of the dated transfer and the short accompanying note that read, "Furniture." When she returned to the living room, she laid the evidence on the... Marlow stared at the screen silently for a long moment before leaning back against the couch, her expression unreal. Her final bargaining chip. She could not manufacture a debt Clara did not. That night, Clara had her scheduled consultation with the tenant advocacy volunteer. The volunteer explained that small claims court remained an option if Marlow backed out of the repayment, but formal legal action would take time and energy. The volunteer encouraged Clara to finalize everything in a signed written settlement, with clear payment deadlines and copies retained by both. The next day, Clara drafted the settlement. It listed the total repayment amount, the 3-month payment schedule, and confirmed that once all funds were received, neither would pursue further claims over past shared expenses. It also stated that Clara would retain her evidence only for enforcement purposes, and would not distribute it publicly or to mutual contacts unless required. She sent the draft to Marlow. Marlow responded later that afternoon with minor edits to the wording, removing phrasing that implied fault. She was willing to settle officially, but she would not admit manipulation or apologize. Clara accepted things. Her goal was recovery, not a force. Before he signed, Marlow sent one last message to Clara. She warned her not to bring Lila into her settlement, and not to share details with her. If Clara broke that part of the unspoken deal, Marlow would refuse to make it. Clara understood. Marlow still cared about her reputation within their shared... But Clara was not interested in her. She had what she needed: an agreement, a repayment schedule, and a witness ready to confirm the pattern if Marlow... The balance of power had fully reversed. Marlow could no longer shift blame, invent debts, or rewrite records. Clara... She agreed to keep the settlement private as long as Marlow stuck to the payment plan. Now the only remaining step was the final face-to-face conversation where they would sign the papers and decide how to handle the rest of their lease. The living room light felt harsh that evening as Clara spread 2 printed copies of the settlement agreement across the coffee table. She brought along every organized folder of evidence, just in case Marlow tried to revisit old arguments. Marlow arrived with a pen and a guarded posture, sitting down on the opposite end of the couch, careful to keep space between them. The unopened drawing tablet still rested on a distant shelf, untouched since Clara had set it aside months before. Marlow scanned the document line by line, pausing at the repayment schedule and the clause confirming no further claims would be filed once the full $1,200 was transferred. She did not comment on Lila, the former roommate, or the pattern of mislabeled expenses. She did not apologize. After several quiet minutes, she picked up her pen and signed both copies, sliding one across for Clara to sign. Clara added her signature neatly at the bottom. Once both documents were dated, she folded her own copy and tucked it into a folder. "We should also talk about the rest of the lease," she said. "I don't want to live here together for the remaining 4 months if we can avoid it." Marlow nodded slowly. She had already considered this possibility. "I've been talking to a friend who needs a place starting next month. She has solid income, good rental references. She could take over your spot on the lease if Mr. Hale approved." That was the cleanest possible exit Clara could hope for. Breaking the lease on her own would carry heavy fees, but a qualified replacement roommate allowed her to walk away without penalty. Clara agreed to coordinate with the landlord to complete the lease assignment paperwork. For a moment, the room fell silent. Marlow glanced at the stack of receipts and screenshots laid out beside Clara's lap. "You're not going to tell everyone about this, are you?" "I have no reason to," Clara replied honestly. "I only cared about getting my money back and ending this arrangement. I'm not looking to spread stories of..." Marlow's shoulders relaxed, though her expression stayed closed off. "The first payment will hit your Venmo by the end of..." Clara packed her files and stood, ready to retreat to her. Before she could leave, Marlow spoke again, voice. "I wasn't trying to ruin your life. Freelance work is inconsistent. Some months I barely make rent." Clara paused in the doorway. "Financial stress doesn't mean you get to pass your personal costs on to me without. The system you built hid those choices instead of being honest." Marlow didn't argue. There was nothing left. The evidence was clear, the settlement signed, and a new roommate lined up to take Clara. Later that night, Clara emailed Mr. Hale to begin the formal lease transfer. She attached the settlement agreement only when asked, confirming there were no ongoing disputes that would impact. She avoided emotional language, sticking strictly. A few passed, and the first scheduled Venmo payment arrived. Clara logged it in her ledger and marked the first installment. She did not send a message legit. The signed doc. That weekend, Alara came over to help Clara sort through boxing. As they folded clothing and kitchenware, Alara asked the question Clara had turned over in her own mind. Would she reach out to their former workplace contacts and explain what happened? To warn anyone else who might rent with Mar in the future? Clara carefully. She held proof, and Lila was willing to corroborate the pattern, but public warnings would drag her back into conflict she was ready to. Revenge would mean staying stuck in this fight long after she moved out. She decided, did not require punishment beyond repayment and ending. "I'm not going to do it," Alara. "She'll have to make her own choices with future roommates. My job is to protect myself moving forward, not police every day." By the end of the week, Marlow's friend completed the landlord's application and the credit check. The hurdle was cleared. Clara's exit plan was fully in place. The conversation was over. The money was on repaid, and she would soon leave the apartment where she had learned to recognize quiet manipulation and boundaries. Moving day arrived on a gray Portland Saturday, soft rain streaking the apartment windows, just as it had on the day Clara first unpacked her boxes 6 months earlier. The contrast struck her as she carried the last load out to the rented pickup truck. Back then, she had been hopeful about sharing space with someone she knew from work, ready to build an easy, cooperative household. Now she was leaving with a signed settlement, 3 completed Venmo repayments, and a much sharper understanding of how quickly casual trust could be exploited. Marlow stayed in her bedroom for most of the move, only stepping out briefly to hand over the spare apartment key once Clara had cleared everything. No final conversation, no attempt to mend things. The quiet goodbye suited both of them. Clara's new rental was a smaller 1-bedroom unit in a quieter neighborhood, farther from her office but entirely her own. There were no shared spreadsheets, no informal pooled funds, no blurred lines between household supplies and personal purchases. On her first night alone, she ordered simple takeout and set up her drawing tablet on a clean desk, the same device that had exposed Marlow's entire billing scheme. She used it for work that evening, and for the first time since her birthday, looking at it did not bring a knot of tension to her chest. Over the following weeks, Clara slowly repaired frayed friendships. Some mutual acquaintances apologized for staying neutral during the conflict, after hearing more complete context. Others remained distant, and Clara accepted that. She did not push anyone to pick sides. The fight had taught her not everyone was equipped to hold space for money-driven disputes between former friends. Alara helped Clara build a better personal budget system, with separate folders for rent, utilities, savings, and discretionary spending. They set rules for Clara to follow if she ever moved in with another roommate in the future. Formal written expense agreements, shared access to receipts, and no automatic blind-pooled transfer. Boundaries, Clara learned, were not. They kept relationships from curdling into resentment. One afternoon, while sorting old digital files, Clara opened the folder full of screenshots, scanned receipts, and the signed settlement document. She kept the records archived securely, just in case Marlow ever disputed the repayment, but she did not linger over. The documents were proof of what had happened, not something she needed to revisit constantly. She thought about revenge often in the early months of the conflict. She had imagined sending the ledger to their old coworkers, posting the story online, or warning every person in Marlow's social circle. But once the money was returned and she moved into her own space, that urge faded. Revenge kept her tied to Marlow's choices. Fairness had let her walk. As autumn settled over Bland, Clara fell into a steady, peaceful routine. She worked, saved consistently, and made plans for a small vacation the following. She rarely thought about the old apartment or Marlow. The lesson stayed with her, though. Trust required transparency, and she never again had to choose peace over protecting. That evening, she sat by her apartment window, watching light rain fall across the rooftops. She picked up her drawing tablet and sketched casually, no spreadsheet hovering in the ground, no pending Venmo charges waiting. The life she had was entirely hers to manage, on her.